Hello. So whoever's joining us, we can see people joining us at the moment. Yeah. And so welcome. So just so that we actually get to meet you and make sure that you can actually hear us, can you just tell us how the weather is where you are, or what your favorite tune of the day is? Just something just interesting for us. So how's the weather where you are? Windy and wet, Jane. Yeah, we've got thunderstorms. We've got thunderstorms like crackling out the back here. Marcus, grey. Anybody else? So it's a small select group, Curtis and Mark. So why don't you take yourself off mute? And miserable, Jane Mormon. Oh, Jane, I really feel that in capital letters. So what about yourself? What about yourself, Curtis? Where are you in the city? Are you like in London somewhere?
Yeah, we're in Mayfair. It's looking a little miserable. Actually in the office today, which is super exciting.
And so when you say super exciting, you haven't been in the office for a time?
No, very, very flexible. So we can come in as and when we choose.
That's very good.
The fish is on the wall.
Yeah, the fish on the wall behind me. And Mark, you've got an intimidating bookshelf there.
Thank you. Yes, it's so that I can see straight out the front of the house from where I'm sitting. It's windy, but luckily without the wet. So I've got half of what Jane has. I've got the wind, but not the rain at the moment.
Oh, so we've got Jane, Marcus, and Richard Piper online. We'll just wait for, we've now got somebody else just joined us as well. So we'll just wait for 30 seconds more. A minute more, and then we'll get cracking on this on the webinar. So no, it's what I love, Mark. You were talking about actually having like sort of printed bits of paper that you can hang instead of bookshelves.
Yeah, fake Zoom backgrounds. I saw you could buy a pretend bookcase. So if you don't have a bookcase to hand, as your natural Zoom backdrop, you can buy one and hang it up. You just have to remember to iron out the creases first, otherwise it's a bit of a giveaway.
Oh, I was going to say, the things that we never anticipated before Zoom. Anyway, my favorite Zoom background, by the way, is somebody video recorded themselves bringing a cup of tea, and then it loops round with them bringing a cup of tea to himself. It's very cool. So we've gone to about 4 minutes past. I'm going to start the webinar today. Yeah. So the first thing to say is just a huge welcome to Curtis and to Mark. It's lovely to have you both as guests. I've got a few things written down here. I mean, Curtis, you're head of corporate social responsibility at charitytransfers.org. You're the most passionate man I've ever known about saving money for your clients. Yeah, it's infectious. And you just know that if you save money, you can do more with the money. For example, you can help in humanitarian emergencies. So Curtis, do you want to just introduce yourself, and just say who you are?
Thank you for that. So Curtis Noble, work for charitytransfers.org, which is the social division of a global risk management consultancy called Aldair Solutions. Prior to this role, for quite a number of years, I used to be head of trade execution at Western Union International Bank, where I oversaw a portfolio of 230 INGOs, helping them to remit funds all over the world, receive cash. Each year faced an ever-increasing revenue target. So I've seen just how much money banks, brokers can try to earn from their charity clients, and in response, tried to help overcome such issues through the inception and setup of charity transfers.
Thank you. And secondly, we've got Mark on the call. Now, Mark, you were one of my students at Base Business School. And, as I said to you then, you've got the most formidable bookshelf behind you. You spent 27 years at Unilever, from the financial controller upwards to become VP Global Supply Chain. And you're the coup at the moment at Hope and Homes for Children. It's just an exciting change. How's it gone?
It's been like a bit like organizational whiplash, I think, going from a sort of 50 billion global commercial organization to Hope and Homes for Children, which is sort of a 10 million international charity. I'll say a little bit more about what we do a little bit later on. but it's been a thrilling and fantastic kind of complete career change over the course of the last 18 months or so.
Well, I'm so glad you made the switch, because the sector is so much richer for you having made the switch. So what we're going to do, this is very odd because I couldn't get my computer to work. I'm on an iPad, and Curtis is a guest actually moving my slides forward. So Curtis, I'm going to have to say next slide, please. Yeah. What we're going to do, we've got a webinar route here. We're going to talk a little bit about efficiency. We're then going to get into charity transfers. We're going to pass over to Curtis and Mark to talk about a real case study so you can engage with this. And then we're going to have open questions. Now, I know this is recorded, and I know a lot of NGOs will watch this afterwards. If you do have questions and you do have comments, or you want to get in contact with Curtis or Mark afterwards, please do. I think you've got your details at the end of the presentation, or obviously myself if you want to talk more about efficiency, effectiveness, etc. Next slide, please, Curtis. This is the team that I run. We do impact, fundraising and finance. If you are interested in any of those things, please. Next slide. And because we know that people drop off at the end of the webinar, as soon as we say, well, that's coming towards the end of the webinar, or because we do the summary, we just talk about what we've got coming up. Towards the end of the year, we've just got 2 fundraising sessions. Please come and join us either for the webinar on the 4th of November or the training on the 2nd of December. That's all I've got to say about Moore Kingston Smith. And so let's get into the presentation major, if you like. Yeah. So next slide, if you may, Curtis. Sorry, if you could go to my slide, and that's the one about next one. Yeah, so I just wanted to frame before we get into Curtis and Mark, I've just got 2 slides to talk about what I've seen. When I worked at CARE, I took this paper to the trustees 6 times. Each time the trustees didn't understand the hidden costs of doing foreign exchange. They saw it as no risk, whereas I saw it as a missing opportunity to do more work. Yeah, I was just always worried about this. And each Friday I used to have a guy who would call me up, and he was from Schneider FX. He would call me up and he'd say, "Hi, Mark, I want to do some business." And he would manage to get round my assistant. He would manage to get round the reception desk. He would always manage to get hold of me to ask me on a Friday lunchtime, can we do business? And what I learned from him is that there are huge amounts of money to be made in foreign exchange. Yeah. But on the flip side, if we can get it right, we can save a lot for our organizations. I think the first place to think about this is really the 4 E's. We quite often throw around, for example, phrases like value for money. Well, what does it really mean? It means being efficient, being effective, getting our purchasing and our economy right, and also getting equity right. Yeah, so let's work through those slowly. So efficiency says, for the amount of resource that we put in, are we maximizing the change that we make? Are we maximizing the people that we help? Are we maximizing the outcomes we achieve? Yeah. So efficiency is all about doing things better with what we already have. Effectiveness is something slightly different. It's about, did we make a difference? Yeah. When you're talking about effectiveness, it's the intervention or the activities we've got going on. Do they actually create change? Or do they damage, or do they create negative? And impact fits into there as well. So do they create negative impact? So effectiveness is very much more about, does it make a change, the work that you're doing? Economy is the 3rd one down. That's how did you procure? How did you procure? Was it the cheapest that you could buy? Was it the best value for money? What about the quality of your procurement? And equity, the final one, is very much focused on social purpose and charities and organizations like social enterprises. It's, did you reach all the people you were trying to reach, or did you discriminate against any of those groups? So when we talk about value for money, efficiency, I believe, is one of the most important. And if you go to the next slide, Curtis, when I was at Bayes, business school, what I did was I looked at about 20 incubators, and I kind of built a model of how an incubator, and an incubator that incubates new businesses, or a startup incubator would look at an organization, and they would look at sustainability, people, impact. They'd look at how you reimagine the world. They'd look at fundraising. They look at all of those things. But efficiency, yeah, efficiency is something that's included in every incubator, but we never really ask ourselves, are we being efficient? Yeah. So how do we maximize the outcome for the same resource? How do we invest for the future and develop an investment mindset? So that's why I just wanted to frame the conversation we're going to go on with Curtis and Mark, yeah, around efficiency in the right way. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do what we do and maximize outcomes for the same resource inputs we put into the work that we do. Yeah, so I hope that's useful, so that you can see out there commercial organizations are really thinking about efficiency. And I think that charities don't think enough about efficiency. Yeah. My final thought before I pass over to Curtis and you, Mark, is Barclays. We wrote a report for Barclays, and we asked charities honestly whether they felt they were efficient organizations, and less than 20% of the organizations in several hundred that came back said they felt they were efficient organizations. So we struggle with efficiency, yeah, as a sector, and we need to get better at it. So with that platform, Curtis and Mark, over to you. And Curtis, you can now stop showing the slides that I've got and show your own slides. And thank you for moving those forward.
No worries. Thank you so much for that intro. So ticking off sort of 3 of those 4 E's, we wanted to basically take you all through a live working case study and explain a little bit more about charity transfers, what we do and what our social offering is, helping to drive impact within the UK NGO sector. Did you know that charities spend between 50 to 80 million pounds every year when sending or receiving funds from overseas? For years, internationally operating charities have been serviced by banks and brokers with poor rates of exchange, at times biased advice and non-commercial deposit terms. Evidence of this was identified over 10 years ago by the Missing Millions report, published by an independent think tank called Stamp Out Poverty. And they identified that in the UK charity sector alone, all those years ago, there could be savings of between 20 to 50 million pounds if charities simply improved their procurement processes and introduced some form of competitive tender when dealing with their foreign exchange exposures. Presenting alongside me today, we've already heard Mark Shadrach, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Open Homes for Children, and we wanted to sort of demo their live transaction cost analysis report, which we'll come to in a moment. So, as I've briefly touched on, Owdare is a global leader in impartial financial risk management consultancy, helping financial institutions manage their currency, interest rate and commodity risk more efficiently and effectively. And then at the back end of 2018, they launched their social division, charitytransfers.org. And what we do as a division is we leverage all of their services, we rebrand them and we put them in the hands of non-profits, so that ultimately more money can be delivered to where it is needed. Every year, we get given a CSR budget to offset the administration costs of our services, and we offer genuinely pro bono services to help charities measure and reduce costs. Since inception, we've helped over 85 UK-based INGOs save more than £5.1 million every year. Now, for those that don't know the high-level intricacies of the foreign exchange market, I thought it'd be worthwhile just providing a brief snapshot. Some of you may know that it's the world's largest financial market. There's $6.1 trillion traded daily. The market can be split into 2, with speculation and deliverable. Obviously, the bit that we're interested in is the deliverable, when you're delivering funds to make change. In the UK, 80% of deliverable funds are processed by banks and 20% are processed by non-bank specialists. There are 2 main types of foreign exchange contract: spot for immediate payment delivery and forward for future payment delivery. And the latter is typically referred to as hedging. Foreign exchange costs, or in other words, the way that a bank or broker can make their money, can be through an explicit means by charging a transaction margin, but also an implicit means by, explicit transaction fee, implicit transaction margin. And the transaction margin is essentially the difference between the interbank rate and the rate that you achieve as a charity. From my experience, having worked with the charity sector and the foreign exchange market for 8 years, spot margins can range from 0.1 to 12%, depending on currency pair. And forward margins are often 1.5 to 3 times higher than what they are on the spot market. And that's because there's added complexity. So the price, the way that they're priced depends on currency contract, currency pair, and interest rate differential between the two economies. And because of this added complexity towards their pricing, currency providers, banks, or brokers can often prompt a charity to trade on more complex products, might not be what's needed. Unlike the audit accountancy world, there's the foreign exchange market is disgustingly opaque. There's no regulatory requirement, especially in the UK, for banks or brokers to disclose upfront with transparency what they are charging their charity clients. And essentially, because there's added complexity towards how hedging contracts are priced, there's an opportunity for those providers to hide margin in an attempt to grow the revenue from you. Earlier this year, in association with Crow, we surveyed over 100 internationally operating UK-based charities about how they navigated the foreign exchange market, the impact of currency volatility, and the key challenges they faced. And I just wanted to highlight 3 main highlights from the report. So the first was 55% of the survey respondents named FX volatility as a major challenge. 63% believe that a foreign exchange market movement of between 0 to 10% would cause them financial difficulty. 43% indicated that the primary method for dealing with currency volatility was by absorbing negative movements using unrestricted funding, which obviously during COVID has been quite hard to seek. And finally, 81% of charities, NGOs, believe access to a tool that accurately measured the cost of their foreign exchange payments would be useful. Our insights reports sort of created waves in the sector. We featured across many social outlets. Most notably, the Financial Times wrote a piece about us, which we'd recommend you to have a look at. And similarly, if you've not seen our white paper, please head over to our website and you can download a free copy. Now, we've identified as a division 3 main issues with the way that charities interact with the foreign exchange market. As a team, and also leveraging the resources available to us through our parent company out there, we believe we've come up with the innovative solutions to overcome such issues. So issue 1 is lack of price transparency. As I mentioned, foreign exchange market's opaque, and as everyone understands, it's very difficult to control costs that are not being measured. So what we do is we can arm our charity clients with a tool called a transaction cost analysis report that allows their finance teams to see exactly what they are being charged, and therefore giving them the power to control these costs. Issue 2 is that NGOs join currency providers who offer big promises. Once onboarded, their financial risk management and pricing often worsens. In contrast, we can act as a gateway to fixed, improved pricing terms. We can schedule tenders with up to 10 of the largest tier 1 currency providers in the marketplace. And with the 85 charities that we've worked with to date, our average cost saving has been at least 41%. This third issue, I believe, has the potential to hugely amplify the savings I mentioned at the start, and that's in relation to hedging. So-called client advice is often delivered, as I've mentioned, by banks, brokers who form part of revenue generating teams, and it's unlikely that if a charity doesn't know of forward points, it's unlikely that their provider will educate them to this level. Now, last month, for an example, we conducted a transaction cost analysis report for a charity that had sold £1 million to buy Kenyan shilling on a 1-year forward contract. And simply because of buyer's advice, this forward contract ended up costing them £16,000 more than it would have done on the spot market. In contrast, Charity Transfers utilises the experience and the systems available to us through our DARE to provide our charities with a more quantitative and educational advisory solution, which ultimately safeguards interest. And we can also help when setting budget rates and designing FX policies. So hopefully from that brief snapshot, you can all appreciate the importance of our offering and perhaps even relate to some of the challenges I've mentioned. I'm privileged to introduce you to Mark, just to tell us a little bit more about Hope and Homes, and then we'll go through our sort of journey together as a working case study.
Great, thanks very much, Curtis, and nice to meet you all over Zoom. Let me just start with a short background on Hope and Homes for Children. We're an international charity with an annual income in the region of 10 to 12 million pounds, and our mission is to end the institutional care of children. The simple fact is that there's a century of evidence that demonstrates how orphanages and other similar institutions harm children through violence, abuse and neglect. And these children are denied the chance to grow up in a family and therefore much more likely to become homeless later on in life, have run-ins with the law, or experience mental and physical health issues. Now, there are around an estimated 5.4 million children living in institutions around the world. And contrary to popular belief, around 80% of those children are not orphans, but have at least one living parent or relative who, with the right support, could grow up in a family. But a broken system separates these children from their families every day, whether that's due to poverty, disability, discrimination, or even child trafficking. So as a charity, we've been working since around 1994 to end the institutionalization of children and fight for every child to feel the love and safety of growing up in a supported family. And we have teams of skilled local child protection professionals in around 10 countries around the world, and advocate also at a regional and global level to close down institutions and create the services locally that will support families and provide those family-based solutions for each individual child. Right, enough of the sermon. From a financial perspective, each year we send between £4 and £5 million to our overseas operations and partners in anything up to 12 countries. Most of those transactions involve foreign currency exchange because we might receive our income in pounds or euros, but be sending it to Africa or Asia. Now, prior to working with Charity Transfers, we simply processed our FX transactions through our regular bank, and we were often sending hard currency even to emerging markets. Most importantly of all, we had zero idea of what our foreign exchange transaction fees were. So when Curtis and Henry from Charity Transfers approached me and offered a free transaction cost analysis through Charity Transfers, I jumped at the opportunity. Curtis, do you want to go and explain what a transaction cost analysis is?
Sure, thank you. So our initial engagement with Mark was to carry out a TCA report. Now, before I go into the specifics of their report, I'm going to show you the live report that we produced quite a while ago now. I wanted just to explain a little bit more about the methodology. Transparency is a bit of a buzzword in the not-for-profit sector, although we found no currency provider willing to truly outline, the exact margin terms that they were charging each charity client. Charities can often try to use free online sources such as xe.com or Oanda, but often there's still quite a high level of opaqueness that exists. Now, the solution to combat this is through a partnership that we hold with a data provider called New Change FX. Charities can finally benchmark achieved exchange rates against the only FCA accredited foreign exchange data in the UK. So our complementary TCA tool provides full transparency on the costs associated with sending funds overseas, helping charities measure both the explicit and the implicit costs incurred when translating currencies. Included in our social offering is that charities can send us 12 months worth of historic transactions for us to build the complementary TCO report. We need very basic details such as trade date, trade time, currencies and volumes involved. And just whilst I bring up the report, Mark, if you could just help explain how you sent us data, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, around 12 or 15 months ago, when Curtis and I first got in touch, I was new in my role at Open Homes for Children, making the transition into the charity sector that Mark Salway described earlier. I had lots of competing priorities. So my biggest hesitation was, is digging out and providing the data going to be very onerous? And in reality, it was incredibly straightforward, and most importantly, a fantastic investment of time. There are a number of options in terms of getting the data across, whether that was simply downloading data from our online bank account into an Excel file and sending it across, gathering up and emailing across the transaction receipts and reports from our most recent FX transactions, or getting data into an Excel format slightly more manually. Curtis and Henry provided me with a video even to show how to do it, offered to meet, and it was really not too time consuming, and it was valuable as well because it gave me a chance to actually understand what our transaction flows were as an organization. So it was well worth investing even in those early weeks and months for me.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So this is the Open Homes transaction cost analysis report. We presented this probably I think it was about a year ago. We always start by just providing a brief snapshot of what we've learned about the charity. So as mentioned already, transacting annually about £5 million, buying majors, minors and exotics on a monthly and ad hoc basis, just using the bank and trading on the spot market. So Mark was able to send us 164 historic transactions of combined volume of just under £3 million. And our analysis showed that Open Homes for Children were being charged an average weighted spread of just under 1.8%, which had cost the charity just under £53,000. As you can see from the graph here, each dot is one of the 164 historic transactions sent to us to audit. On this axis, you've got the sterling notional being transacted by the charity, and on this axis, you've got the spread or margin being applied by the bank or broker. If you were to hover over a dot, all of the reports are interactive, so it would bring up further details of when the trade was committed and what margin was charged in its entirety. Similarly, if charity wishes to look and update the parameters up here, you can move these parameters to look at a specific time period. If you use multiple counterparties, you can drop down to have a look at the different counterparty margins. We could do this for spot and forward transactions, look at majors and exotics, and similarly show you that just on the biggest transactions, you could update this parameter and it would reflect the report as so. Now, just for today, wanted just to help highlight the difference or the existing costs that Open Homes for Children were incurring when buying major currencies. So of the 160 transactions, 128 of those were when buying major currencies. The average spread that was being charged on those currencies, 1.75%, which costs just under £37,000. On the exotics, there were far less transactions, only 36 transactions. The average spread was 1.8%, and the total cost was just under £16,000. Now, we can break the analysis down further to show per currency pair. This can help Mark, for example, understand the actual flows that the charity is incurring. We can break it down to show corresponding cost per currency pair, and also, again, similarly, the average weighted margins that are being applied. So here you can see that when buying Kenyan shilling, Open Homes for Children were incurring an average spread of 4.53%. As you can see, the largest exposure that Open Homes for Children had was when buying euros, which actually incurred quite a relatively high margin of 2.76%. And of this £53,000 cost, £22,000 of that was when buying euros, their largest exposure. All of the transaction cost analysis reports contain a trade log so that you get to see exactly where we get our visuals from. This can help when corresponding to the data that you sent us. Just to take you through the top line, this is when the trade happened on the day, the trade time, the currency selling, currency buying, currency pair, the amount that you sold and bought, the rate that you achieved as a charity. This is the accredited reference rate that we get from New Change FX, our data providers, and therefore the difference in these two rates in pips, percent, and then total cost in sterling to the charity. Mark, it'd be great to hear from you just in terms of how, I guess, this first part of the transaction cost analysis report helped you with your new role at the charity.
Well, I mean, it was transparency I hadn't had before, and the organisation hadn't had before. Being able to see transaction by transaction what we were being charged, and there were two big insights. One was that actually some of the spreads were particularly high, even on relatively, let's say major currency transactions like the Euro GBP one, Curtis, that you highlighted. But also that as an organisation, we were making more trades than we actually needed, either because we were sometimes double changing money, for example, changing sterling to euros to send it to Romania for them to change it to RON locally, or doing several small transactions where if we bundled them together, we probably would have got a better rate. So there were a number of efficiency areas to explore, but most importantly, it gave us real transparency on what we were doing. That £53,000 of cost should have been sitting in my income and expenditure statement, but had previously been buried. And now suddenly there it was visible. And so, of course, what I wanted to know is how much of that could I save?
Which nicely leads on to the second part of this report, which also relates to our second service. So this is where we get our advisors involved. We look at the annual flow of the charity, what currency pairs you're exposed to, and we suggest a realistic, achievable pricing structure for each charity client to be targeting. So for Hope and Homes, for major currencies, given the flow across the year, we actually, bearing in mind that they were being charged 1.75%, we suggested that actually they should be targeting 0.5 to 0.8%. Similarly, for exotics, even though the flow was a little less, we suggested that their achievable pricing structure should be between 1 to 1.5%. Now, sometimes we do these reports and charities are already buying currency within the competitive margin bands that we indicate are achievable. When that's the case, these reports are not redundant. We encourage charities to sort of plug this transparency into their financial utility to overcome sort of providers worsening pricing over time to keep that level of radical transparency towards the costs. When there is disparity between what we indicated was the existing costs and what we think is achievable, and we follow these very simple steps to help release a competitive tender to our panel of 10 providers. So just to take you through the steps, step one, we discuss the audit results in the report, we explain various slides, and we offer context surrounding the forecast saving. We've sort of done this on today's call. Step two is to access the target margin identified in the report. We then run a competitive tender between our panel of 10 providers. And just to explain how we classify a tier one provider, they're all basically the biggest providers, banks and non-banks in the marketplace, that we deem to have held the sort of the highest reputational status, credit rating where applicable, operating track record of at least 10 years. They all operate segregated client money accounts, essentially the biggest providers in the marketplace. Once we've released the tender, then we would make the appropriate introductions to providers that wish to accommodate the charity at the improved pricing terms. We typically aim to set charities up with 2 providers so that you can, on an ongoing basis, cross-check the rates that are offered by each provider. But obviously, you're not obligated to use new providers at all. Now, none of these are obligatory facilities with any providers, but obviously it makes sense for you to use the providers because we've been able to negotiate that improved pricing structure. Step 4 is just to explain that, once we've set you up with a new provider, if it's needed, then we don't just wish to sort of stop contact with the charity. And this is where we can truly partner with each charity client to offer impartial advisory on an ongoing basis, help setting budget rates and designing FX policies. Mark, could you help sort of reflect on this on this process with Open Homes?
Yeah, I mean, my main reflection, as I've said to you before, Curtis, is the tender process and changing provider was incredibly straightforward. Yeah, so Charity Transfers did all of the work. The broker recommended to us was a tier 1 broker. So yes, we need to do due diligence, but it was relatively straightforward. And it was therefore quite simple, if you like, for me to convince the trustees of the organisation that it was the right thing to do, because we could potentially save £25,000 for the organisation and get more money out to our operations, to pick up on Mark's opening point around efficiency. For the provider itself that we've gone with, and everyone will end up potentially with a different provider, but for us, onboarding was really smooth. The online platform that we now use is very straightforward. It allows us to do segregation of duties and separate approvals, and payments to our country programs of partners have been incredibly reliable. So it's worked extremely well. And in addition, in terms of the saving, we've just run a repeat transaction cost analysis. So a year on, we've looked with the help of Charity Transfers at 45 selected transactions we've made in the last 12 months. We've saved on average 56%. So more than £25,000. And we've brought some additional transactions in. So we were previously sending sterling to our operation in Rwanda, and they were converting locally in a way that had zero transparency. We've brought that in and been able to do it at a very competitive margin as well. So I now have really good visibility about what it's costing me to send money to Rwanda, and I'm confident we're getting a much better deal than we were before.
Perfect. Great to hear. So therein lies sort of the end of our presentation. This is the offer through our partnership with Moore Kingston Smith to help add more charities through this initiative. If your logo or name is not on there, we encourage you to get in touch. We'd love to be able to help you audit the costs you're incurring through whatever means. We're keen to work with charities that don't have a complex treasury function, but we're also interested in helping charities with huge budgets and quite big complex treasury teams as well. I'll just put this slide up here if you scan this QR code, you can hopefully get my contact details. It would be great to hear from you following this webinar.
So if you don't mind stopping sharing your screen now, Curtis, what we'll do is we'll just open up to anybody who wants to ask questions. I mean, the first thing is from my point of view, when I worked back at Care International, we used to send about 40 million abroad, globally about 210 million, and we just had no clarity. We had no way of actually seeing how much that was costing us. And when I actually got to find out how much it was costing us, it was huge. And so, Charity Transfers, thank you for doing something about the problem and getting the transparency. Back to the efficiency agenda we talked about at the start here, I just believe that if we're going to get better as organizations and have more resource, efficiency has to be a big part of this, whether it's through technology, whether it's through just asking yourself, can we do the things that we do on a normal day-to-day basis better? I mean, there's procurement specialists that can do very similar things to what Curtis has just shown around, for example, telecoms, like sort of electricity. Could you put, for example, some solar panels, up to actually give yourself a different type of electricity and be green at the same time? So I just think, that was exceptional, Curtis and Mark. I absolutely adore it from my past. It takes me back to Care. And just any questions, really. I know that, people will have listened to that. What we're going to try and do is just open up the lines. If Vanessa can make everybody able to talk, or do we just actually have to do Q&A, Vanessa? I'm going to take that, we just do Q&A. So while I'm waiting for people to put in the chat function some questions, or if you like, into the Q&A, yeah, I'm going to ask Mark a simple question, which I really want to kind of explore. How did your charity sense the opportunity? I mean, how did it realize that there was a problem there and that this was one way to get greater, if you like, sort of value for money and like be more efficient? Was it you coming in who questioned it? Was it somebody from the trustees? How did you actually sense and seize the opportunity?
It was a combination, I think. So obviously I was coming into the charity as chief operating officer with my background in Unilever, which has a massive, as you can appreciate, treasury function, and is sending billions of pounds across the world sort of every week. One of the areas I wanted to understand as part of my handover and induction was, so how do we handle FX? Do we hedge any of our exposure? How do we manage our transaction costs? And what I found was we were simply processing them all through our regular bank.
Yeah.
So that was well, hang on, surely there must be a better way. But honestly, I shouldn't take all of the credit, because it literally coincided with Henry and Curtis's team contacting me sort of out of the blue, going, did you know there's an opportunity here? So it was that wonderful combination of a bit of a hang on, there's something here, and just proactively being approached by Charity Transfer at the same time. And as I said earlier, my only question was, have I got the capacity for this now, given I'm new in the role and we're juggling all sorts of things? But it felt like something where, that combination of my experience and their expertise could add some value quite quickly for the organisation, and thankfully so it proved.
And so, Curtis, do you tend to find where there's a new person who comes into the organisation who questions the way that things are done, or asks the questions like Mark does, that's where you get to find, if you like, the opportunities to help charities?
This is a mixed bag, in all honesty. Some people who've been in post for quite some time can often want to challenge status quo, especially if they're not able to audit with transparency what these costs are that they're incurring, even if they are a bit hidden. Sometimes it is easy, for a newcomer to make impact in the charity by exploring new initiatives. And that's why we can see often those that have just joined a charity want to sort of explore this initiative as well.
Sorry, I was putting you on mute just because I could hear a little bit of feedback, but that's really useful. I've got a question here from Jane Pettit, and she's saying, we are a far smaller charity, sending about 250k a year abroad. I can see there could be savings, but how would you advise me to move forward? I mean, Curtis, Mark, how would you advise a much more modest, if you like, sort of figure? And at the same time, I'm also going to ask others to put questions into the chat or the Q&A to keep us rolling forward. So please, if you could just take that question, and I'll see if I can get some other questions.
No worries. So Jane, we would welcome an introduction to your charity. Our division essentially was set up to help charities with at least £500,000 worth of foreign exchange flow, but we're not against helping all charities of shapes and sizes. Essentially, what we can do with smaller charities is we can do a bit of a shortened version of the transaction cost analysis reporting. Often we've done a live rate comparison using the data that we can get from New Change FX. So perhaps what would be a good idea would be to set up a call with one of our associates where we can sort of note down the exact rates that you're achieving on a live basis, and then build a corresponding transaction cost analysis report like that as well.
That's really good. Because I'm waiting for some other people to ask questions. I'm gonna like sort of grab another question from you. How did the trustees, Mark, handle? And I mean, do you have a finance and audit committee, for example? How did they approach this? Did they understand it? Did you bring Curtis to the meeting to help them understand? How did you address the trustees in this?
So yes, we have a separate finance and audit and risk committee. I didn't take Curtis along, no offense, Curtis, but I took the transaction cost analysis report along, as people saw on the call earlier, and I shared with them the scale of the opportunity initially, of the sort of the opportunity to save potentially £25,000 plus. They needed, as is often the case in charities, because the trustees are signatories, they needed to be the ones who signed on eventually to the FX provider that we're with. So I had to, had a separate call with our treasurer once we'd done our due diligence to explain what we wanted to do and any sort of concerns and the safeguards that we had. But luckily, I had a finance committee who were trusting and relatively straightforward to convince. I appreciate it might not always be like that for people, because FX can be something that just people feel uncomfortable with, and therefore just back away from any indication of change. I think it's important to differentiate within FX between transaction costs, which is just purely about minimizing the cost of doing business so you can get more money into your operations, and separate discussions on hedging, which are much more about, well, are you going to take a particular risk appetite and stance in the way that you manage the risk of currency volatility. And I've still got to have the hedging conversation yet, which is much more, even in my head, is much more nuanced. The transaction cost piece was the closest thing to a no-brainer for me.
And so when you get to the hedging piece, then Mark, how are you going to engage in that and take it forward? Because I mean, sometimes those are quite complex instruments.
Yeah, they are, and maybe that's why I've kind of, it's taken me a while to get around to having the headspace myself to figure out what I want to propose. Because the aim of hedging is not to take a view on currencies. It is to give yourself a certain reaction time by locking in a rate for a certain distance ahead, either when you've got particular restricted funding in one currency that needs to go and deliver a project in another, or more generally when you have flows. What is that right horizon is a little bit less obvious. I'm familiar with it from a commercial organization context, because then you're usually buying yourself time before you can raise prices in the event that currencies lead to an increase in raw material costs, for example. In the charity sector, it's quite different in thinking about, well, what do I want to pin it to? What's the principle that underlies my approach to hedging?
I mean, I looked at removing risk, as my key principle. I mean, Jane, Marcus, and Marion are now unmuted and can kind of join the conversation. I mean, has anybody got a question directly? I mean, I'll just literally, if you just want to ask a question directly, unmute yourself and just ask anything you want to know.
Hi, this is Jane Moorman. I'm from, I work for 2 charities, and we send money to scientists and our welfare scientists around the world. Very small amounts compared to the amount that Mark has been sending. What we do find is often when we're sending money to countries, there seems to be an issue with the transfer, and the holding bank hangs on to it and then bounces it back to us like a month later, and we've lost quite a bit on the exchange, and we then have to send the money back. What am I doing wrong? I mean, I think the information I'm being given by the grantee is correct, but something seems to happen midway, and this can be the States, it can be India, it doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason where it's causing problems. We don't send to sanctioned countries, obviously, much as we'd like to send to Cuba. We're not allowed to, because animal welfare for us has no boundaries. But so I would love to use an organisation like yourself, Curtis, because I think it would be really useful. But we're so small, I don't think you would benefit from having us on your portfolio.
No worries. As mentioned earlier, Jane, we're happy to work with all charities of shapes and sizes. So even if you are sending a small amount, we still love to help your charity increase its impact, especially if you're experiencing some sort of troublesome pain points when delivering funds to the places that you're doing work. A lot of the time it can be based on the actual provider that you're using. So certain providers are specialists in delivering currency to certain jurisdictions. Certain providers have what's called a current country capability listing where they'll show you in black and white exactly what you'll need to send successfully a payment to a jurisdiction. Like India, for example, has added complexity towards how you deliver with success payments to India, given the FCRA regulations, etc. But yeah, I guess it would be starting to if we were to hold a call to understand a little bit more about the charity, to understand if you ever get any notification from the intermediary banks as to why they are returning the payment, and to then perhaps try to set you up a more specialist provider in sending payments on behalf of charities to those similar jurisdictions where you're working.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. Anybody else want to pop themselves off of mute and just ask a question directly? So I'm gonna ask a question while I'm waiting for somebody else to come. Mark, where does the efficiency journey take you next? I mean, are you going to start to have a look at the the costs associated across the organisation? I mean, where does efficiency take you next?
We've looked at, in the sort of 12, 15 months I've been in the role, we've looked at a host of things. We've outsourced payroll, for example, because that is phenomenally cheap to outsource and much more resilient if it's with a payroll company rather than us being reliant on basically one individual. We've changed energy provider. We've looked at, for example, the number of printers we have in the office and completely overhauled the leasing structure of printers. So we've gone, we across a number of lines, in our UK cost base. We've run through them. This was by far the biggest, though.
I was going to say, do you think putting digital in your organisation will help in any way? In other words, like sort of getting much more streamlined workflows around your project management and things like that.
So that can certainly help. I mean, as with all organisations, accelerated dramatically by what we've been through in the last 18 months. The complete shift to video conferencing, whether that's Zoom or Teams, using online shared document management systems, as long as they're suitably protected from a GDPR and safeguarding point of view, they're suitably robust and reliable, has helped to dramatically change the way that the organisation works. We're in the process of getting out of, we've still got on-site servers that run our account system. That's headed for the cloud later this month. That'll enable us to decommission, de-risk, avoid £20,000 of investment in computer hardware that we don't need. All of those sorts of things. So it's a gradual process, and often it's a bit more dull, if you like, than some of the let's say the eye-catching end of digital transformation. A lot of it's in the basic infrastructure of the organisation, I think.
So I've kind of come to last couple of minutes. I did say before, Mark and Curtis, that you were going to have like sort of 2 or 3 comments to close, from the process that you've been through, Mark, as an organisation, and Curtis, from the fact that you work with such a wide range of organisations, helping them with their issues. Yeah. So I was going to say, we're kind of to that point of closing statements now, please, gentlemen.
So, well, why don't I go first?
Absolutely, Mark. Yeah.
I mean, I wish that every charity that is transferring money internationally had a phone call with Curtis and Henry. Because and I know I sound like I'm a salesman and I'm getting a kickback from charity transfers, but I'm not. Well, the work they did for us was free, and it saved me £25,000 and brought me transparency I couldn't otherwise have, and that's so valuable to not to the organisation I work for, but also for other organisations when fundraising is harder than ever. As we now kind of come out hopefully from the pandemic, but fundraising is harder than ever. Why would you not want to know what your international transfers are costing?
And I would mirror the same, in that when I was at CARE, I just wish I knew. Yeah, I really wish I knew. And so, Curtis, if I'd have known you then, I would have certainly picked up the phone and had a lovely conversation and got you to do the same piece of work. So, Curtis, the final saying is, or final thought is really yours.
Thank you so much for such a big privilege. So yeah, I would just encourage all charities that haven't had the opportunity to measure this cost before to do so. We are producing 6 to 10 transaction cost analysis reports each month for different charities. We are looking to, over the next 5 years, to truly become a sort of global directory for the way that charities interact with the foreign exchange market. We are growing quickly. That's because we've got an innovative solution that is disrupting the conventional way for charities to send and receive money from overseas, reflecting back on such a charity buzzword, which is transparency. So if you haven't already got in touch, please do so. Let's challenge the status quo together, and let's take back control of some of the budget and get it to where it is needed.
And with that, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to those that have joined us, and those that will watch this on video coming on, because we tend to get a lot of people watching our videos afterwards. Thank you, Mark, so much. Thank you, Curtis. And just your energy shines through. I really want you to save more money for the international development community and those just sending money abroad. As I say, thank you for joining us. We've got a fundraising webinar. We've got some fundraising training coming up before the end of the year. And I think that's a wrap. I don't know what else to say, really. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much indeed.
Bye.